You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
Hi, this is Mike Baldwin, and I'm joining you again alone this week. This is for the week of, what week is it? Anderson, disembodied life. We're looking at the last week of March, and as you can see behind me, I've got video running from the big Midwest RepRap Festival. And Anderson, you told me you were part of this.
Yeah, it was a great time to be in Goshen, Indiana last weekend. If you really were into 3D printing, that was the place to be.
Yeah, and as we're watching the video behind me here, yeah, it looks like it was all indoors. For some reason, I had the impression it was going to be in a cornfield.
I think we're surrounded by cornfields, but we weren't quite in them.
So sadly, one of the reasons I'm presenting this is that we wanted to do a live roundtable with the group out there, and from what I've heard, there just wasn't enough bandwidth to go around, and we couldn't pull it off. So myself, Eric from Ultimaker, Brad Hill, and Chris kind of talked about what you guys were doing, and also the RepRap community as a whole and the open source community as a whole, and I thought it was very interesting. So if you get a chance, they'll be in the show notes, but that was called Live from the Midwest RepRap Festival, a roundtable discussion on open source 3D. And the other one was last week's, what did I call it, Carbon3D clip, just a lot of hot oxygen. As you know, it was a very popular subject in the on the internet last week. It was introduced in the TED Talk in Canada, if I remember correctly. And yeah, it got a lot of sensational news, so we kind of broke it down. We had Brad Hill on, who, if you remember, is the little RP inventor, great fan of SLA, is really both avid in the RepRap community as well as the SLA. Just an overall good guy, very humble, very smart, so I'm glad that we had him on. And we kind of talked about some of the things about the Carbon3D, which I thought, you know, a little good to be true, possibly. Go back and take a look at that episode. So, anything you want to add to the Midwest from your own experience, Anderson?
No, it's just, you know, we need more events like this. This is the one chance that you get together to focus on the technology as opposed to, you know, having products thrown at you or kind of like an industry showcase. This is kind of a meet and greet with all the people that make 3D printing community amazing.
Yeah, and you know, just looking at this, the ton of stuff. It looks like there was an area for a meeting area. Sadly, it wasn't all enclosed, but yeah, it looks like it was extremely active. I think it went for 3 days, and yeah, it was a very interesting event. And I wish we really could have pulled it off for live. Or I wish that I had the money to get out there myself and cover it, but maybe in the future. Okay, well, on that note, let's move on to our news items, and let that play a little bit longer. I'll go to my screen, and let's see what we've got coming up. Oh, you know, I don't even know if I want to give it airtime, but it's always in the news, and you know, I feel that it needs to be discussed on a lot of planes, and you know, sadly, or maybe not, Chris is not with me. He has obviously some strong opinions. He believes in the right that we should have to be able to either print or have guns. You know, he's a big fan behind the guy that created this, which I guess is Defense Distributed. They were in the documentary Print the Legend. Yeah, he's a colorful character. I wonder what his motives are behind this. But you know, why would you go out and make a gun like this? You know, Anderson, you live in the great state of Texas, who has some very liberal, that's kind of an oxymoron, laws about guns. So what is your opinion about this?
You know, like ultimately, you know, with any sort of set of technology, someone's going to do a lot of good, and some people will be interested in doing a lot of bad. And I think it's one of those things where the conversation is usually the bad usually gets more interest than the good. It always comes down to, for instance, we're doing all this amazing work with Enable, and yet, the thing that gets the most hits or the most views is talking about, defense distributed or 3D printing projects similar in those lines. So I think it's going to be a constant debate, but I personally choose to focus on what good we can do with 3D printing technology.
Well, likewise, and as you may have seen some of the articles that were written about me, yeah, I totally do not understand this. I really don't. I don't know what this proves. Yes, we can use 3D processing. We've used CNC machines in the past to create weapons. In fact, that's how a number of them have been made in the past. So
Right.
I don't really understand, what this is other than to say, hey, and if you want to go out, this is his website. He's making a living off of the sensationalism of creating weapons for the whole purpose, in my mind, of killing somebody else. So I'm not a big fan of it. Obviously, if Chris was here, he'd have his own opinion, but he's not today. So I personally would like to move on to another subject, and that is, I try to find the artist that's using 3D. There's a couple things that I really enjoy. I think there's, part of me is an artist. I've started out in 2D drawing back when I was a kid, and kind of evolved into 3D artistry. And anytime that I see somebody who is taking something to a new level, and I've got a little video I guess I can show in the background as well. But it just kind of is the background of how she created this character. But what's really fun about it is that it is, if you remember the old days, you created characters with rubber material or elastic material that was used to bind each of the articulated joints. And here she goes through a full, what do you call it, sped up time sequence, putting her object together. And I worked over a year ago with the guy who did something similar. And I had to 3D print out the components for his doll. So it's interesting art. I had a couple of other guests on. Aaron Thomas was one who created the Ronin, articulated action figure. And, sorry, I don't remember his name. House, a gentleman from Germany. So I think it's really neat that we got this printing. For the most part, you can do it unless you sculpt it. So, thank you. You're welcome to just spit it right out, Anderson. I sometimes forget that the audio in some of these things may be overpowering. I'll turn it off, and I get lost in it. But maybe that's good. Maybe I should get lost in it. But if you couldn't hear me, hats off to these people who are creative using 3D printing, taking their 3D designs, printing them as tangible objects, and in this case, multiple pieces to create an articulated object. And as I'm showing here, this is a time-lapse or sped-up video of her assembling it. And, I'll actually speed it up even more till we get to the completed object. So there you go. So it's fully articulated, and the elastic is used to keep the pose. So the other fun thing is, normally we've covered men who are developing their action toys. It's nice to see, the other gender creating graceful objects, and again, not implying that both are associated, but this is not just a man's world. This is also a woman's world who may have an artistic bend and into 3D modeling. And so I'm glad to see that this is not just a single gender, and that there's a lot of popularity amongst everybody. So you want to add to this, Anderson? I mean,
I think at Midwest ReproFest, there's another 3D printing artist that was kind of doing similar things. Luby, she kind of did the Scarab and all the various dragons on Thingiverse. She's also experimenting with something very similar in terms of creating, you can pretty much orient and fix your models in some way using elastic cording as well. So other than that, nope.
Well, that's a good thing, and I hope to possibly maybe you can send me a link to her, and at a later date, when things settle down, I might have her
Sure.
back
I think
on.
those files will be available sometime soon.
And actually have her on as a guest to talk about it. I plan to have this with Verdue on as well. You know, it's kind of nice to see different perspectives on it. I like to see art, and especially 3D art, becoming tangible, and it's happening more and more. So on to my next item. Let's see. Okay, well, this is the big item, and Anderson, I hope that you can chime in on it, and that is, you know, I saw briefly, I can't remember who was covering it, either 3D Print or 3ders.org or one of these others, talked about this new, out of nowhere, out of Australia, and we actually did an interview with a group, 6 to 7 months ago, who had come up with a unique method of 3D printing where they used air pressure to create the lifting process. And you know, one of the things that I noticed is even though he had 3D printed objects, the actual quality wasn't good. And I think what was happening is the turbulence of the air pressure, because it was may have been creating some artifacts. So, and sadly, I haven't heard from him. And I thought, well, maybe this is a carryover, but I don't think that's the case. I think that this is literally, you know, somebody else. And you know, as you, Anderson, I was trying to find out more about it. So the only thing that I could come up with is that it is again another DLP SLA-based process, but it uses an over versus under projection system. And they did have a video. Do you remember where that video was? Maybe if I go out to YouTube.
I think 3dprint.com has a video.
Yeah, so I'll do that. So how about you talk about it a little bit while I find it?
Yeah, I mean, I think little information really provided other than the claims of the fast speed. I think we can kind of attempt to fill in the blanks, but he seems to have everything under wraps as he is attempting to file a patent on the technology that he's discovered or is using. And, you know, I think it's one of those things where Carbon3D came out last week, and here we are with someone else making similar claims with a similar technology. I think it's too soon to really kind of pass a judgment on whether this is real or not, but I think with time we'll slowly figure out what's going on with this guy's project.
Yeah, and I can't seem to find it. Let me see if I can jump out to YouTube and see something. But yeah, let's see if he actually files a patent for it. But as mentioned, it seems to be a version that's, what do you want to call it, using projection on the top of instead of below. And if I remember what Brad told me is that one of the reasons you don't see more of that is a patented process by 3D Systems, if I remember correctly. So you know, he may run into that. If you go out, here we go. Yeah, I found it. So I will bounce to my camera. There you go. So this is what, you know, one of the things that I thought was attractive, and here's the light process being projected above it. And then if you notice, I don't see any material at this particular point. Let me accelerate the video a little bit. And then there seems to be a little bit of resin or something on it. At
Right.
least the color changed. And so he goes through. And I guess he is doing a skull, if I understood correctly.
Right, and those interior dots are supports, most likely because it's a shelled object.
Okay. So there you go. There's the bath, and then so there's the final object. So again, there is no time comparison on this, but the interesting thing is that that's a fairly large bed size.
Right.
So if he is successful, I would be just interested because it is a large bed size. You know, again, the camera view is blurry. I don't know if he actually pulls one off. Let me see if I can go to the end. So the camera's a little blurry, so I can't really determine the quality of it. But it is interesting, and it does appear that he's projecting from above. As mentioned, Brad indicated that there might be some patents already covered by that process, which is why you haven't seen it. So yeah, I'm excited. It's interesting. Let's see if I can go back to the website and identify as their cost. Yeah, I think he's looking at different price points, as low as 2,900, as high as 3,200, depending on the projector. That's reasonably priced, for this type. Yeah. As I mentioned to Brad last week, his little RP, for about $500, and then depending on how much you want to spend on your projector, really creates some excellent parts. Yeah, so if you really wanted to get into this at a low cost, you can't beat the little RP. However, as the word indicates, you don't have a big bed size. But for this price, and if that truly is the bed size, I may be pretty interested in looking at it. There don't seem to be any images of what it will look like. I think if you go out to his Gizmate series, it just talks about the bed size. Maybe if we go back to the home page, there's some resin or some material, but don't see any images. I'm sorry, go ahead.
With the top-down approach, I mean, one of the things that you kind of notice in the technology is that every time it changes a layer, it has to sit there and wait a while because essentially the liquid or the resin is still moving from the platform descending, which causes a turbulence inside the liquid itself. So for me, I'm still skeptical about the resolution because if he's continuously descending, there has to be some sort of displacement in the liquid as it's progressing. So for 50 microns consistently, it's interesting that he's claiming to do it continuously based on what I know about various top-down SLA machines.
So let me wrap my head around that. So essentially what you're saying with a top-down SLA type machine, are you saying that they have to intensify their image in order to move further down the layers, or are they using a mechanical bed system? It did look like he had a turn.
Well, in most SLA systems, they have a very, very viscous resin, just so that essentially it doesn't move as much if it's agitated by any motion. And they also have a wiper that comes across the top to kind of help settle the layer down quickly. So in his case, his resin seems to flow pretty easily. And I'm just curious that, with the continual motion of it descending, because that's essentially what he is claiming, right? A continuous method.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the case, so that it continuously moves. So what you're saying is the vibration creates possibly turbulence, or even just material jitter. That would be affecting. Okay. So, yeah, and as I mentioned, his videos were blurry, so you didn't really get an accurate look or a macro look at it, which I would have assumed might be. And this is what, like I said, we did an interview with another gentleman out of Australia who was using a pressure-based lifting system, but he did show his final output, and I didn't see the quality being what you can get on a Form 1 or even on a little RP for layering. And that is something, at least with a Carbon3D, they did show the models, and they did seem to be smooth, and actually showed some macro photography of how smooth it is. So, but Brad alluded to that just using that oxygen porous material is expensive, so the whole thing could be an expensive process. So we'll see what happens here. I mean, it's an exciting time, as you're aware of, and I look forward to seeing more about where people go with this.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, that's the news item. So let's move right into products of the week. Actually, projects first. I have been working, as you're probably aware of, Anderson, I do a lot of 3D scanning, and I work with a number of them, and I've got actually 2 items to talk about here. One of the ones that I have worked with on numerous occasions is the structure sensor by Cipitol, and another company out of Russia called Itzy's 3D, who we've also done an interview with Victor. And he just came out with 2.1.1, and I don't know if this has addressed some of my concerns, but I always felt that their textures, like a cylinder, were wrapped, and since the process is not real-time, by the time you came back around, the texture of one eye appeared to be different from the other eye. So it does now look like as you can see in the image behind me, again, this is my wife Siobhan, that no longer seems to be the case, and now we're seeing normal consistency in the textures. The only concern I still have for the process, and I keep pushing him, is to push up the number of polygons or faces. In order to minimize the bandwidth required to push up the model and textures, he limits it to 50,000. I have found that printing 50,000 does create some issues, and as you can see in the jawline here, and in rounded surfaces like in the hairline here, it becomes very obvious on the limitation of the polygons. And so, create a pro mode if you need to, and if you need to charge for your cloud services, I think some people would be interested in that. In saying that, I had 3D printed some of these through Shapeways using their gypsum or their sandstone color, and they do come out fairly well. And then you can obviously do some shaping of your own, some sanding but keep in mind that that color is surface oriented, so you may just sand off your color. So minimize what you do to the exterior of the surface. But as I put a long I don't know, description of what I did, but this was based upon the iPad Air 2, and one of the things that I'm hoping will come out sooner by both the Citadel and ITSY's 3D is an iPhone version, and the reason for that is that the iPhone has a better camera. And I found that the low noise, in fact, I've modified the texture on this to reduce that noise. There is some chromatic noise, and it appeared in normal room light, obviously not direct light. So if you start dialing down the light, it really becomes obvious on the iPad Air 2 camera. So hopefully that'll be less of an issue when we go to the iPhone. Plus, the iPhone is much more portable, especially, not to promote my own product here, but if you use the Neodi mount case, and if you remember, I gave one away. I don't know if the guy knew what it was, but it'll be interesting. But essentially, you can put a case in it, and I use a magnetic mounting system to mount the sensor. I also use my 4-eyes RGB lens on it, which is a very, very weak close-up lens, and it just seems to tweak the focus a little bit. I know people think, oh, that shouldn't happen, but I found doing it with and without, I get that extra sparkle. If you notice in her eyes there, I use my Neodi Bright LED bar, which allows me to get more even lighting around the subject. Which is very important, as you're probably aware of, Anderson, if you want to use artificial 3D lighting, which is another plus for Sketchfab. They now offer that 3 lighting, or 3 lights, and various, which they did not have in the past. So let me show you what this thing would look like shadeless, and then versus the lighting, and I find that you can now do more dramatic lighting, and you can color. So I gave it a softer or a warmer tone than the original, which is probably true because the LED bar is a 5600 Kelvin LED light system. But if you notice, well, the background is even better than past. What normally you'll see in a lot of these models is that the front is well shaded or lit, but the back becomes shaded. And now with having supplemental lighting right on your iPad, that takes care of that. And plus it adds that little sparkle in the eyes that many 3D modelers seem to add, and it's right in there. So I think this is one of the better models I've done so far. It really brings out the color. And one of the things I complained about before was the accuracy of color. So enough about promoting ITSY 3D's next product. It's out there. If you want to use it professionally, there is a cost to it now. What did he tell me? I think it's $1,000 up front, but that gives you, 100 scans, if I remember correctly, like $1 a scan. So there is an upfront cost, but if you look at some of the other alternatives out there, like Artex Scanify, which you can't buy below $100,000, this is a very cost-effective way if you want to get into doing this at festivals and so forth. And on that note, I wanted to bring up this little video. Let's see if I've got it here. Yeah, my favorite. I don't know if you've heard of the Great Fradini. But I had him on like one of my first shows, and he is the kick. He's out there at Coney Island, and he essentially created the first, what is he calls it, the Scanorama, which is a platform, and then he's got this hand crank here that allows you to scan people. And let me see if he goes to his table here. But he has done probably hundreds of different people, and he's got a lot of great stuff out there. So, shout out to my friend Fredini, who's been on a couple of times. He's got some cool stuff. In fact, he's still using the old Connect to do a lot of his modeling. So, and he has tried some other things, but I don't know if he keeps going back to it because it seems to be the most well tested. But yeah, he's an interesting guy. So on that note, let me go on to the product of the week. I have brought them up numerous times, and the reason for it is, a lot of people, if they want strength and a little bit of flexibility, they go with ABS. But the problems with ABS is ABS is hard to work with. You have to have pretty much an even temperature across the bed. Well, you have to use a heated bed. Otherwise, you start having lifting, especially with items with a wide surface. And, it just becomes a real issue. So they were on Kickstarter, and I think Chris and I both decided to go and order their 3D package, but the only one that I've really worked with is their Polymax. And, one of the things that well, first of all, I love the material. If you've got $50, yeah, it's a little pricey. It is a perfect PLA material. It has all the qualities of ABS. I mean, literally, it's almost too good to be true, and in this case, it is true. It works well, and my only complaint was it only comes in one color, but now it comes in two, white and black. And if you remember the old days of Apple, that's all you could buy things in. So same thing here. So I'm glad that I can now buy it in black, and I have already ordered some, and it should be here in a few days. So I'll be testing it out. So again, you can get it in white or black, but it's an excellent material. And if you haven't tried it, and plus it comes in both 1.75 and 3 millimeter, I would say pick one up. It's well worth it. Okay, well, it looks like Anderson has dropped out. He didn't say that he would be with us the whole show. So let me go on to the next item. And I was hoping that he could hang on until then, but it has to do with, I've created a new corner that I call Organic Creations, but it's about bioprinting and 3D in medicine. But essentially, how do you apply, 3D into the medical community? And here's another one that I thought was cool that was in the news locally. This is done out at 3Ders.org by Simon. Thank you, Simon. But essentially, he writes up how Curtin University in Australia, and it's funny because we've done a few interviews, and we just talked about another group in Australia. So they seem to be really big into using 3D. So hats off to them. But it appears that the electrical and computer engineering class created a sensor system that allows what's it called, about chronic disorders, and that, but essentially they show some x-rays here of some scans, but they, using a Leapfrog 3D printer, have created embeddable sensors so that you can monitor literally the healing of a particular bone in this case. And so I think that might be very interesting. So take a look at that article. Again, I don't know if the legal system in Australia is, a little more flexible than here in the United States, but I've seen a lot of things and a lot of research from people within Australia, and obviously in China as well, who really is trying to move forward with 3D. So I look forward to reading more about this. There's a couple of other articles on it, and maybe I'll get Murray on to actually talk more about it. But yeah, very fun. I was hoping that Anderson could join us a little longer to talk about it, anything that might be going on at Rice University. By the way, if you're not aware, Anderson Tai is one of the lead 3D print researchers there. He works in the bioprinting department of Rice University. We had him on an interview, and they are working on some very interesting things with bioprinting. One of the main things is that most of the things you see out there are essentially tissue layers, but do not survive out of the petri dish, and that is a big problem. So they're working on the infrastructure, which means the vascular system and the waste systems. So when he gets more to talk about, it appears that he's somewhat under embargo to really talk about it, but I hope to have him on at a later date. Well, that seems to be about it. I was going to talk about the digital toolbox, but I think I'll hold off on that. And then, let's see, I'm hoping that Brian can join us. Brian, if you're out there listening, please take the time to pop in, and I'll email him right now. Brian we had him on a couple of weeks ago. He is, in my opinion, a PR guru. He's always pushing the envelope, and I'd really like to hear what he's got to talk about. And so if not, I'll just skip my, as I call it now, the VR corner in a round room, and come back to that, and we can look at upcoming events, and then we can just kind of move on. So it's interesting that it's now 10:05. I pretty much covered everything in a half hour. So having one person talking like myself makes this show go a lot faster. All right, so I'll send an email, and then we'll just move on. Okay, so where are we at? I'll just bounce back to myself. Well, let's see. If you remember correctly, I have over the last few weeks, I received my Fuel 3D, and I've had an opportunity to work with it pretty intimately. And as I mentioned in previous conversations, its big strength is that it can capture very quickly a snapshot or a 3D snapshot. The problems that I have with it is that it only captures it, I don't want to say superficially, but the depth information is minimal. And I noticed this in their prototype. So if you look at some of their 3D objects that are on their website, they don't have a lot of depth information. So I was told that, well, okay, well, maybe this really excels at negative volumes. So let's say depressions. So actually I have a use for it, and that is working with an orthotics person down in LA of looking at the scans, which are depressions in a material for your feet. And I found that even in this case, that it only had half the depth information that's needed. So the other concern I had is, how do you scan multiple? And I did get an opportunity to work with an alpha version of the software. And I have to use the word alpha. It's very minimal. But I was told it would be. But I'm kind of concerned if they're actually going to be able to bring this out in a month. And I was using the process that they indicated to me, where you essentially overlap 3D captures. And one of the things that I used was 45 degrees. So essentially the front of your face, and then you turn 45 degrees, take another scan, and then 90 degrees. So literally I was trying to capture, what would that be, 5 different 3D scans, and then stitch them together. And again, I think the huge problem, hey there, Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well, and how are you doing?
Okay, I'm just, maybe not, I guess I'm not bashing, but I'm talking a little bit about the Fuel 3D. I've had some opportunity the last couple of weeks to really work with it. I was given an alpha version of the software to stitch. And sadly, because the lack of real depth information, even the stitching process did not seem to go as well. And again, I've only done it a few times now, and maybe I just need more experience with it. But I feel the whole process is a little convoluted. You have an opportunity here to take snapshots in 1/100th of a second, but it takes a lot longer than, let's say, the the occipital structure sensor, even a Connect, because it doesn't do the stitching process in real time. And so you have to bring it into another application, and then you have to use a target for each one of these scans. So if you don't line that target up, and it has to be realigned every time you take, let's say I was talking about my face. So you have a face, you turn, rotate, you take another shot, but you've got to have that target right below your face. So each time it has to be moved, and if you're not holding it, that means your subject has to hold it. So the whole process seemed a little detached, and I was told through my interview with Stuart, the CEO of Fuel 3D, that eventually you will not need that target. But right now I still think it's somewhat of an underdeveloped product, and I really can't recommend it. You know, the sad thing is, you know, the occipital, even though they're making great strides, still is a little rough around the edges. So I think the real big boys out there, and I think they know it, is Artec with their $10,000 and $20,000 scanner. And so, but if you really want to be doing this professionally, yeah, you might want to look into that. And that's from somebody who's a big promoter of the occipital structure sensor, develops products for it. But we're still not there, and you know, maybe in 3 or 4 months, and same thing with the Fuel 3D, we might see more in that area. So glad that you could join us. I am ready to talk about VR. I don't know if you've heard of this headset, but I did a brief interview with them out at CES. Pop by their booth, and a couple of things were pointed out, and I'll bring up the email. This came to me in my email. And essentially, they're ready to announce that it's available to buy. And I'm a little curious about that, because when I went to their website and selected buy, I got this, which is for $139. You can order it. Well, at the show, they said it was going to be $89, including the 2 units here. In my back and forth emails, they said, no, that was a misunderstanding, but clearly they had said that. You can, if you get this email, so I could pass it on, get this for $100, but it's still $20 or $10 more than what they suggested. But, you know, like many things, once you actually do production or you find out that there's a greater interest, you might want to adjust your pricing. The other thing that concerned me was the 5 to 7 weeks. One of the things that I was hoping for is to have this a little sooner than that. They told me it's because of the great demand and the back orders, but I don't ever remember having an opportunity to order it earlier, so I'm a little curious about that. Are you familiar with this item, Brian?
No, I'm not familiar. What were your impressions of it when you demoed it?
One of the areas in the prototype, and the thing that bothers me with many of these, is how well it fits on your head. You know, if you're going to wear something like this, it has to fit comfortably, and that means you have to have a foam that is comfortable and pliable. Otherwise, let's say let's see if they have some images. Yeah, they don't. Here we go. If the area around the nose is too tight or starts to rub against your nose, it hurts. I mean, one of the nice things, even though it's more costly, and again, you have one, so you can tell us about the Samsung VR is what's that? VR gear is comfortable looking. Am I right there? I mean,
you know, I'll say this. I've had a DK1, a DK2, and I have a Gear VR. I actually pre-ordered the S6. They're really making us buy everything, basically, if you want to be a VR developer at this point in time.
I know.
But I will say that the DK1, I couldn't keep it on my face for longer than 10 minutes. The DK2, maybe 20. I regularly play maybe 45, 50 minutes at least on some nights when I just want to tune out and play, and you put it on at 1 o'clock, and the next thing you know, it's 2 in the morning. So they really have done a great job. There are certain issues, obviously. There are 2 foam pieces that come with the Gear VR, and the one that's installed on it is a little thicker, and then the replacement one is a little thinner. So after going through many, many demos and having probably at least a couple hundred people demo it, I took it off because it was starting to get really nasty, and I always clean everything between each use with a little bit of alcohol and a little duster to help dry that off and get off any kind of skin flakes or anything that might get into it. And I found that the smaller one provided a little bit, maybe my impression was that it gave a little bit of a better field of view. It kind of increased the immersion slightly, but it was a little tighter to the face. And I did notice that it really comes down to how well you can adjust those straps and how much time you take to adjust it. So if you're in a situation where you're demoing it to a lot of people, ultimately it's not going to be the most comfortable thing. But what I will say is the Gear VR is actually quite an impressive piece of kit, and you know, I've demoed it to hundreds of people, and I got to tell you, at least 10% of them have gone out and bought a Note 4 and a Gear VR after experiencing it. It's definitely something that people who are like ourselves, early adopters, really can get a feel for what the future is holding, and it's exciting. There's obviously limitations with the library and so forth of available games and experiences, but you know, interestingly enough, when you were discussing your issues with the 3D scanner, there's so many products that we're all basically beta testers for these days. Mm-hmm. And take, for instance, the Gyroptic camera that I just bought, and I did not pay attention to their Kickstarter. And when I went to the Kickstarter page, the comments were all like, oh, well, it's pretty much the typical of what you get from any Kickstarter that's late. What's going on? They're not communicating with us. I got a little bit nervous. I know you told me you were going to wait for me to test it. So
there's a reason for that.
I know. Well, you know, here it is. We're all looking for that perfect 3D solution, virtual reality video solution right now, 360. And I think that people are kind of overreaching a little bit, going for the 360 stereoscopic, because when it comes down to it, file sizes are enormous. There's no solution for IPD. Ultimately, that's going to really be solved by light fields.
What do you mean by IPD?
Sorry, interpupillary distance. Everybody's eyes are a little bit different as far as how far apart they are, and obviously that will affect stereoscopy and parallactic vision. So if you shoot with two cameras that are like where their centers are like this close, it's going to be a little bit. People have wider IPDs it's going to be off. Do you know what I mean? And ultimately, that's going to kind of lose a little bit of the immersion, and I think it doesn't really add much. To tell you the truth, some of the stuff I'm looking at, I'm much happier if it's just a good, smooth stream with high-quality detail. And as you know, we both have the 3.360 camera, which on initial impressions, it's not a bad camera. And my hope is that they're going to continue improving it, but as we both know, it definitely has its limitations, the biggest of which being the vertical field of view. And from my conversations with their tech support, and I know yours as well, they promise that that's coming in some kind of update. So right now, I don't know what to say about that, but what I will say to you before I let you chime in, I did a shoot about 2 weeks ago with it, and it was a video shoot, a behind-the-scenes video shoot for an actress singer, and some of her entourage kicked it over, and it got scratched immediately, and everything we shot after that was pretty much unusable, in my opinion, because I have very high, standards. And I called them and said, well, what are we going to do about this? The first thing they told me was get a little bit of that lens polish and use it. I'm like, are you sure? So I waited a week. I did some research. I couldn't find any that I felt comfortable using, so I called them again and said, what do you recommend? And they confided in me that they actually have never actually used anything to polish it, and they haven't had that issue. I'm a little bit surprised because the entire thing is based on mirrors and a plastic lens that covers the outside. That's, with the GoPros, like the one I have right here, you have this thing. If this gets scratched, I buy a new one, Yep. And that is really a solution that they're going to have to, a problem they're going to have to find a solution for ultimately.
That's a good point, if I can chime in now. And using it is, if you look at their I'm not going to bring it up, but if you go out to their website, what's the first thing you see? Some people on surfboards in the ocean or wherever it's at with the salt and that. It's supposedly splash resistant, but I would be a little concerned, as you are, and I'm very ginger with the handling of it for that reason, because the thing that I found is that if you do scratch it, and I just noticed even having water droplets on it or some type of smudges, it's very apparent because the way that it focuses, it doesn't focus outside of it. It seems to have a wide focus area, so you can clearly see smudges. And gosh, when you told me you scratched it, I said, oh my God, that would be nauseating, because that's the only thing that you would focus on. Unless you moved it in such a way that your main focus, which then alleviates why use this camera to begin with, it is away from the scratching. Now, if I'm understanding you correctly, you had more than one scratch?
Yeah, there was a scratch that when somebody kicked it over, and then of course it's a little like static electricity charge, so it had rolled around on something and picked up other stuff around. I know. And I valiantly continued to shoot, but it happened in the first 10 minutes of our shoot. And the stuff did look good. It did look good. We were on the roof. We were right next to an elevated train, and the singer was singing, and it was beautiful. The sun was setting. Unfortunately, I just could not get away from looking at that one scratch that was fairly significant. So, to their credit, when I called, I said, look, I don't know what I'm going to do about this, but I had my thoughts of buying a second one and experimenting, maybe stacking them vertically on top of each other. Maybe you could make a custom little rig for that, and we could get a little extra vertical field of view. And in my testing, I did get a couple extra feet. Nothing that was significant enough. So I called them, and to their credit, they didn't know what the replacement policy was going to be, but I sent it back to them and got it on Tuesday, and I received a brand new unit. I only sent them the camera. They sent me everything new, so I basically have 1,000,001 cords and batteries, which I guess isn't bad. But and I got it back on Thursday. I haven't even taken the wrapping off of it. And actually, some friends of mine are going to go out here to Rockaway, go surfing on Saturday, and they were like, "Can we borrow it?" And I'm like, "I just got it back. I would hate to, get some grit or sand in it." And you're totally correct. I don't know how they did it. I'm sure they're just replacing it, between it. Now, on the upside, it's a great concept that they can increase the vertical field of view, or if we can figure a way to hack it by, stacking a GoPro on top of it and shooting up, maybe. I tried that. The issue is going to be stitching. And what I really like about this camera was the ease of use. There was no stitching and all that. But as you know, the difficulty is in getting it supported for all of the things like YouTube's 360 video, and I saw your video from South by Southwest.
Yeah. Let me let me talk about that.
Yes.
That really was frustrating. I had the same positive experience when they realized their Bluetooth remote didn't work. They immediately sent out new units, and like you said, they sent out the entire kits. They didn't really push to get their unit back. And so I sent them the other one, but told them, hey, I'd like to keep the battery and charge me for it, so I have 2 batteries. So they seem very flexible, but at the same time I also feel like they're somewhat distant from this product. They actually do other things, and I didn't feel some of their support really understood the product. And one of the things that was discussed with me is, hey, we're going to be supporting YouTube when it comes out. Well, it's out, and they're really not supporting it in their what they call it, Ultra HD mode, because they don't have a utility, and as you have found out, it's a double stacked image, where in order to fit in a standard UHD video format, well, you have to unwrap that and then essentially put it back into a UHD format, which means you have obviously the black bars, and that's what I found to work the most effective. And then I was able to upload it, and I think I get what's the format right underneath Ultra HD? It's between 1080p and the other. I think it's 12 something or something like that. And so I do get a little more effective quality out of it, but it really was a long process, and I do think that they should have been above it. And the fact is that if you go out to the YouTube channel and look at what they support, their product isn't part of this support process. So obviously there wasn't any dialogue. So I really had to do some things in order to make this work, and it did, and I think it's effective. But like you said, you're limited to a cylinder view, which can be fun, but it would be nice. And the fact is that they are using pretty much, or an egg shape or a sphere, not necessarily a sphere, but they are using a mirrored ellipsoid of some sort to do this. I do think that they can probably tone down their what do you want to call it? Their undistortion utility or whatever they're using in order to map out the cylinder. So I do think there's a possibility in software for to do it, but I haven't seen a firmware update in a month. So I don't know where they're going with it. I don't think maybe they're selling as many as they hoped for. And as you said, I am concerned that They don't have a quick replacement process. Let's say you could have an outdoor version of this. Why didn't they go with glass? You know, there are chromatic aberrations with plastic. It does scratch easily, and it does appear to pick up smudges, and because of the way their depth of field is, yeah, you see all of that, and that really detracts from it. So, you know, all the positives, as you said, we are the beta testers. I was hoping for more immediate use of it. Like you said, you can quickly come up with images. So I've toned down, and I found that if I wanted to push up to YouTube, just go one level lower in your resolution, because then it's a strip again, and then you can export that strip immediately to YouTube. But then you lose that upper quality mode. So one of the things I was told is that they'll look into it and create a mode specifically for YouTube, which means a wider strip back into an Ultra HD version. So we'll see where that goes. Oh well, so one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on, let's just finish up on this immersion Virilia. I guess that's how it's pronounced. It looks like a neat headset. I was concerned about the foam in the interior, at least on the version that I saw. They said they were going to improve that. You know, now that it's back up to $139, or I think a $30 or $100 discount if you use the email that they sent out, it puts it in that $100 price range, and I know that there are other options that are going to be out there. I did like the fact is that and let's see if they show it here, this front area, I guess I should go back to my camera. I'm talking without even having it on the screen. The front area here opens up, and then they have brackets, and they told me that they will provide 3D printable files so that if you get a new phone, you can modify that. So it makes it very quick to change it out to support new phones. Out of the box, I think it will support the iPhone 6 or 6 Plus, as well as the Note 4, and maybe even some of the newer ones that are coming out. I do like this IPD control out on the side, and he did show it to me. If you go back and look at my video, which will be in the show notes, it seemed pretty easy to work with. And you know, with the open design, it seemed fairly lightweight. And they now have an SDK, which essentially is another Unity library, so I don't know if it supports 5. I downloaded it, but I haven't looked at it yet. But one of the things that I was very interested in is this open shell here, and be able to modify it, so either by not having it on or modifying this area in the top of it to support the structure sensor. You know, as we've talked about before, Brian, one of the goals for this year is to be able, as I call it, environment awareness. With the 3D structure strapped to the front of it, you'll be able to walk around in your environment, and your Unity, or let's say UDK, or even the Scene Kit from Apple iOS will be able to recognize this and be able to support it with the environment, so you could go to a museum or a cave and actually walk around as though you're in it. So I really see a lot of positive, but we don't have something like this that we can use as a platform. So I was hoping to move forward with that. I think they really have found that they've got, you know, a star on their hands here with another headset that's, you know, and VR is gaining popularity, and, you know, I've sadly kind of gone to the backside as far as any interest. So, but good for them. I think they'll sell a ton of them, and it looks like a fairly decent product. But we'll see.
Do you have any idea when the occipital SDK for the structure sensor is going to be updated for the their Unity thing that's going to also allow that tracking, positional tracking in it?
Well, I don't know if they're actually going to support Unity, or at least I haven't been told, but what I do know is that they do have a Scene Kit version of it that will be available. You know, I can say a month, maybe 2 months. They haven't really indicated a clear date. I think they're pretty close. They're going to have a game available to work with, and they may be bringing both out. So let's say April, but again, you know, it's all up to occipital. And yes, when that comes out, I'm hoping to either have a how-to on how to modify a low-cost version, which I'm working on now from a Chinese manufacturer. It's not very comfortable, but it would give you something to work with. And like I said, they are supporting tablet. They are playing around with using SceneKit to create two cameras in order to provide that split view. But it's all at an early stage. They've until I kind of showed the excitement, hey, we could strap this to our head and have an immersive environment that doesn't exist. I don't think they realized it, or maybe they didn't let me know that they were really aware of it. They were basically tying this to a tablet. But one of the things is they really haven't supported the iPhone 6 or 6 Plus.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't through my pushing and working with them in the background and testing it and developing cases for it, who knows if it would become a reality. But I do think in April that will become a reality as well. And that really adds a lot more flexibility and, in my opinion, the world's smallest all-in-one 3D scanner. And they have done a lot of things. They were just in the news. Obviously, I was aware of it, but 3D Print did something on them as well. So they're coming along, and they've got some other things that I can't talk about that are really exciting. But this wasn't an episode about occipital.
No, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm just waiting to be able to use my full Neota mount system and Neota Lite system.
Well, that's true. You did, yeah. So I will send another email out this weekend. Yeah, the Neota Bright, I'm working on actually including a battery and a dimming circuit into it. It may make it a little longer, but it won't be any longer than the iPhone itself. It will probably still contain, I think it's a 36 LED board in it, but it will also include the battery underneath it plus a charging circuit. So that way it's completely independent and you don't have to go scrambling for some other 5-volt source. So we'll see how that goes along. I like right now because it'll be very quick to bring to market, and these little 5-volt battery units that you can use for your phone can be used for that as well. I found that I don't really use the dimmer function because if you're using this in standard ambient light, the more brightness you have, especially if it's diffused, the better it is, as you could see in my Sketchfab, my latest with the ITSY 3D. But yeah, they're coming along. In fact, that kind of gets me, well, one of the reasons I wanted you on last week is to kind of talk about Unity. And I think Unity 5, I saw some of that, maybe while you're talking about it, I'll bring up another video that I have of a Unity promo of the version 5. So why don't you kind of run through really quick what makes Unity 5 different from the previous Unity 4 version, and what do you see happening in the VR world with the latest Unity? So,
well, I will say, I've been a Unity Pro subscriber or license holder since about 2008. 2009, and that's when I first got into it. I moved over there from Macromedia or Adobe Director, and we use it to build a lot of experience type stuff. And Unity 4 was a nice upgrade, but we were waiting a very long time.
I'll go ahead and turn it off.
Sorry.
Go ahead and keep talking.
Okay. No,
so
sorry.
Go ahead and talk over the video while we're...
Sure. We were waiting a long time for the built-in Unity GUI system to come out, and it did in 4.6. And I have to say it is really great. I did a 2 games in 10 days for a big conference, and the Unity GUI was a large part of it. And I have to say it was quite impressive. I hadn't really delved into it. So one of the biggest upgrades, in my opinion, from Unity 4 to Unity 5 was the creation or the ability to have a 64-bit editor. And you might say, well, that's not really that big a deal, but when you start working with bigger projects and importing in files, and you get a lot of times in Unity 4 where it would hang, and you wouldn't be able to import stuff, and there was a lot of trying to get things to build, and it wouldn't work. So that's, to me, it's a pretty significant upgrade, and it's really more from a development standpoint and less from an end-user performance standpoint. But that was very important. In addition, Unity 5 is what I consider to be the beginning of upgrading the platform to match or come close to matching the visual quality of engines like Unreal Engine 4 or some of the other ones that are out there, that being their major competitor. Of significance, the licensing structure changed from Unity 4 to Unity 5, where it's effectively free at this point in time to develop with. Obviously, I believe if your company makes $1 million or more a year, you have to buy the licenses, and that's about $1,500 per. You have to buy an Android Pro, iOS Pro, and the Unity Pro in order to get Android Pro and iOS Pro working. But that seems like a very small amount. There are no additional residuals or anything like that. You have to pay royalties, if you will, as you do with Unreal Engine 4. And I kind of felt that was a little bit cleaner. I mean, my company does not make $1 million a year, but we pre-ordered so that I could have beta access. And there are some neat features that they added in. You get a little bit of discounts and free assets in the asset store every month. So that's a nice thing, considering I probably have $3,000 to $4,000 worth of assets. It's a little addiction of mine. When I showed one of the Unity evangelists recently my list of asset store assets, he sent it to the woman who runs the asset store just to kind of say, this guy is he's a little nuts. So, but it's nice because when you have them there, some of them are very well updated, and you can pull it out of your bag when you need something done really quickly for prototyping, or I get a lot of ideas in the middle of the night, as you know, and I just spend a lot of time developing with that. So to that end, Unity 5 is really a great upgrade because it allows for global illumination. So that means that you can have lights in the scene that is kind of like indirect lighting, and they opened up their graphics pipeline to make it more powerful. 64-bit for iOS, which is a big deal because all apps that are now new apps that are being put into the App Store have to
be 64-bit.
Have to be 64-bit. They also support Metal, which is like this API for GPU graphics, enhanced graphics rendering, I believe. So you get to use the GPU and produce better quality and higher frame rates. And there are a couple things. I mean, it's just like anything else. It's interesting that it's kind of like the beta testing we're doing for everything else. It's a beta test too. I spent the last week and a half trying to get Unity 5 working with Gear VR, and I had a little bit of access to some early builds and was actually able to build with it. Unfortunately, I forgot that I had my Unity 5 project was built on an older SDK for the mobile SDK, so I hadn't updated to the latest, and that apparently broke some stuff. So there was a lot of going back and forth, and Oculus actually had to release a new SDK or a patch 043.1 to match the patch 2 of Unity 5. So all you people out there who are looking to use Unity 5 with Gear VR, that would be your path to use those development kits and that particular patch for Unity. So that being said, it's a chore. You go back and forth. I mean, I'm working on a Project Tango project right now. I happen to have been one of the lucky developers.
Project Tango, for those of you who don't know, is the Google, what do you want to call it, 3D depth camera system.
Yes, and they're kind of using it to help chart indoor spaces, places where there's no GPS. So it has like a learning mode. Well, it will learn. I got a little nervous at first, quite honestly, because it went into learning mode, and I was concerned that the inner workings of my office were going to be all of a sudden uploaded to the internet, and everyone was going to know, where all my goodies were kept. But that being said, I think that what I've been working on with Project Tango is going to have I think it's going to be really cool. It's basically kind of a mashup of like the occipital sensor, and a couple other different sensors. There are like 5 or 6 sensors on it, and realistically, I just kind of bought it on a whim, and I'm hoping that there's going to be more coming out of it. Apparently, Google has taken their Project Tango group, and they've moved that whole thing into Google proper instead of being kind of R&D, and so that means that we're probably going to see something integrated into a consumer product, I'd say, in the next 6 months. And couple that with Apple buying PrimeSense about 2 years ago, which is the company that makes the sensors that Occipital uses in the structure, that originally Microsoft used in the Kinect. And they haven't really been selling those sensors anymore. You can't really get them, the latest one. So my suspicion is maybe an iPad Pro or something along those lines. They're going to start adding that in, because I believe that the 3D selfie is going to become huge.
And don't forget, there's another company, I can't think of their name. However, MakerBot, even though they squashed, let's just say it was a rumor. It's realistic, but they weren't ready to identify it at CES, so they squashed the report on it. But MakerBot is also going to be coming out with a handheld 3D scanner based on a time-of-flight product, and sadly it escapes my name of the company. Hopefully I'll have that CEO on in a future episode. But yeah, he kind of leaked me some information, and I don't know what his relationship is, but he's using that sensor is being used in a couple of products. There was a product created by Creative Labs that uses that sensor, but again, the name escapes me. It's the time of flight, and supposedly they have a newer product coming out that is much smaller. In fact, I haven't been out to their website. They may have already released something, and they have supposedly, with MakerBot's help, overcome some of the deficiencies of time of flight for detailed scanning. So it'll be interesting. But yes, I do think the 3D selfie has the technology. However, at least in this part of the woods, I don't know about New York, there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in it, especially amongst adults. You know, first of all, when you're scanning, it's in public, so maybe this booth-style thing might work. But I think if you don't put it into a camera that they themselves have access to in the privacy of their own home, you're not going to see a lot of people going out and getting 3D selfies. One, some people don't want to be looked at as being narcissists, so they don't do it. And two, you know, there is still a cost associated with it. You know, when you can take 3D, or not 3D, standard selfies for free, you know, why are you going to pay somebody, you know, $20 to $70 or more for the scan, or even in some cases free, but it still costs, you know, up to $100 to get a 3D printed or so.
Well, no, well, I think what I was referring to was it was going to be small enough and into devices, like your iPhone. So you would be somewhere and you would pick up your phone and
Right.
you would try to shoot that, and then you would shoot a little 360 photosphere to put yourself into it. What I was thinking of, and this is what I've been telling everybody for the last year, is Sketchfab is going to end up being the Instagram of 3D selfies. I guarantee you're going to see that, because when I go out with my structure scanner, I literally have people lining up to get scanned. And if you put that into everyone's phones, people are just going to be scanning everything. That's my belief. Now, that's not this year. That's not next year, but that is my belief that is coming. So,
and I agree with you. I think once it becomes personalized, just like the video camera and the standard static image camera, yeah, it will be another option. I think Sketchfab has positioned themselves to be that location that people will go out to. They have actually added a in-place embedded app within Facebook, so if you put something out on Facebook, you can immediately rotate it without having to go out to Sketchfab. So I think they're moving forward. I used it from a medical perspective, so if you wanted to evaluate people over time and send it to a medical, they do have a private, I don't know if it's HIPAA compliant, but if you give permission, I do think it's fairly secure. In fact, I was told that the file system is encrypted, so it's not like that you can literally break in and get at something. So that could be another use for it.
Doesn't Intel also have a product? See, that's what I was thinking of. They have it now in their laptops, and they're advertising it with that guy from that show I never watched or something. But so I would imagine that if you could sit here and go like this, and you'd have a selfie right there. And some people are infatuated with spinning themselves around.
Dell, I can't remember, Dell Venue something right, but it's an 8-inch Android tablet has that built into it. But sadly, and it was a couple of weeks, Intel doesn't really have an SDK or anything available yet to take advantage of it. So it just kind of sits there, especially from the capture process. But they are supposedly working on something as well. So yeah, there's a lot of things out there. The good thing about Occipital is that they've had a year head start, And so they've seen a lot of the problems, and they've worked out, like in their new version, 0.4, they have the ability now to use the color camera on your iPhone or your iPad to help track. So if you're using things that don't have a lot of physical attributes for stitching, you can now use the color component. So, and they say that actually helps. Let's say if you wanted to scan a cylinder like a can of Coke, you can now do that. And I've actually used it in, let's say, scanning a foot or an ankle, and I think there is some improvement there. So, they've had some opportunities to look at the deficiencies and work on it. And I think some of these others who are just putting something out there are running into this. Maybe they may have a larger budget to get things out sooner, but they still don't have the head start that Occipital does. So I still think, and plus I've been told with a grin on their face, and that's about it, that they've got other things coming out from a hardware perspective. So it'll be very interesting to see what their new approach will be in the upcoming years. But
do you think there's a chance they can get bought by Apple or somebody like that?
I asked them that directly, and they aren't looking to be bought by anybody. But I kind of thought about that. With all their experience and working with obviously the same technology, I would see that they would be that candidate. But they're not. I don't know. If they're upfront with everything, and I don't actually deserve to have upfront conversations.
Sure.
Who am I? But from my assumptions and my thinking, no, they want to be an independent company. They're making money as an independent company. Unless somebody comes out and offers them a ton of cash, I don't see it happening. But then again, did anybody expect Oculus to be purchased by Facebook? But when you wave, what was it, $1 billion?
It was two. I think it was $2 billion, but it wasn't. It was like stock and this and that.
Yeah,
it wasn't really.
Of course, there's not cash on the barrel, but even so, there's a lot there, and plus, now they have deep pockets to continue research, and I didn't see it as a negative. And the same thing with Occipital. If they do get bought out, it will probably be to their benefit. But I'm a little scared about Apple. You saw what happened to the PrimeSense. They literally tore down everything and then just stuffed it away, and you haven't heard what they're going to be doing with it, which is the Apple way. But that's my own feelings. So we are now at 10:46. I think we pretty much covered everything. I'm going to see how I can get the upcoming events in. So if you got anything else to talk about, I'll give you a couple more minutes, Brian, while I look up.
I think next time we might, I might have a little information about Microsoft's HoloLens, a little inside information. So.
Oh, that'll be exciting.
Right. Yeah. So I thought, we could talk about that. And if you guys out there don't know about the HoloLens, it's basically kind of like their version of Magic Leap, or it's an augmented reality, in my opinion, kind of device, or enhanced reality, and it should be interesting. I'd be very interesting to demo it and hear more about it. So
are you under embargo, or?
No. It's not me. I have my contacts throughout the industry.
So we talked at length about it, and I have my theories. So I think part of what makes this work is that they've built in a smaller version of the Connect 2 inside of it, and maybe even multiple versions. I'm thinking both front and back. Who knows? I mean, it was all, but I think that is a key to them able to get the precision, at least from what the media has identified, of showing 3D objects in the real world, and I think that plays a huge part in it. But a lot of people complain that the processing needed would require a larger battery. That's why the thing had to be strapped on. To actually have it on your head may make it bulky, even hot, and not give you much battery life. So hopefully you can tell us a little bit more about that. All right, well, let me quickly find so do you know of any shows that are coming up in the 3D or the VR or the AR? Actually, I know that AR World is coming up in May, but that's still a little ways off.
Yeah, right now my attention is really on the VR jobs have picked up here in New York. I am getting hit from every side, from every client I ever had asking about virtual reality. And to that end, I booked 2 jobs for Fortune 100 companies last week for virtual reality.
Wow.
Yeah, so I have some of that going on. I have my own stuff going on. As I had told you before, I'm actually building a 360 spherical rig, not stereoscopic, but it will be using 4K raw production cameras. You know, trying to make use of my broadcast background for something. So.
So you've got a few red cameras? Is that what I understood?
No, it will not be red.
Oh.
I'll tell you guys only because you know, I'm all about sharing. But I've always been a person who looks for the best value in things, and I'm not caught up on, it doesn't have to be Ikegami or this or that, you know. And there's a company called Black Magic, and people know about them from
Oh,
their.
that's right. Yeah, you did
Yes.
mention that in your post. I am also a big fan of Blackmagic. I've got their little 1080p cinema camera.
Exactly. And they've improved it with firmware over time, and I was going to get one of those when they were on sale, actually. They always do a sale, I think, in August or something, where they take their lowest camera and they sell it half off. And I've been waiting for a good 4K camera. I waited for 3 years for the Scarlet, for Red Scarlet, and then they raised the price. So I pretty much waited and waited, and I'm still waiting. I don't have a good 4K production camera. So my idea was, why not just try to use production cameras that are syncable, gen lockable, because that's the biggest issue, is getting them to sync, and that's the limitation of these GoPros and all these other things. Plus, it's a 35 millimeter sensor, basically, and with the right lenses, you can do a lot. So I found a nice little Sigma lens that's fairly inexpensive that will do wide angle, about 180. So you get about 3 or 4 of those cameras, and we set them up with a little custom rig, and we'll see. I'm going to rent them first, and then ultimately, if that works out, probably purchase it. But I think that a purchase price for each setup of a camera, because it does require SSD and some other stuff to make it really usable, and obviously a lens, it's about $5,000 all in per setup per camera, and I think that's pretty reasonable considering that the next closest thing. Oh, the other thing it has is global shutter, which is a huge thing that even the big cameras don't have. I think the newest ARRI might have that, but other than that, I don't even know if the Red, well, maybe the Epic does, or the Dragon, but I don't know if the Scarlet does. But whatever the case, that's very significant because it just gets rid of that whole jelly look when things are in motion and so forth.
Yep.
So, that's what I was really trying to do. I was trying to come up with a solution that was going to get around a lot of the things that were issues, and also a production workflow that would, could be graded, because that's a big thing. I don't think anybody's doing any color grading in any of this stuff, and all the software is really, I think they're being developed by a lot of software developers, but not necessarily video engineer people type, are involved in it. I could be entirely wrong, but I just haven't seen that reflected in what's out there.
Yeah, I listened or watched or even read about the behind story of the Paul McCartney, that little setup where they did a full 360, and I do believe there was some grading that went on there. I don't know to what extent, but I also know that they also did some audio grading as well to improve that. But yeah, for the most part, it's just still experimental. So I agree with you. I think color grading is important, as well as lighting. If you do have a cinematic background or even video background, I think it really helps to put out some good quality. Well, make sure that you send me a link when you do finally get something up. I'm hoping, I don't know if YouTube, but supposedly YouTube is making some great strides in their own 4K stuff. Just heard that in the news.
Yes.
So yeah, please make sure that once you have something ready, be ready to come back on.
Definitely.
But I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. So let's look at, I'm going to bring it back to my camera. So what do we have going on? Well, essentially, if you're in China, you can, on the April 15th and 18th, oh, actually, I'm sorry, it just started today, the 3D print show in Berlin. Almost forgot about that, which I've, they're doing quite a few, and this is the Berlin version. They just finished the one in Spain, 2 weeks ago, but they've been bouncing around. I think the San Francisco one is in June or July. But could be interesting. They always have some good artists that are at their shows. I think 3D Print does a good roundup, so if you wanted to head out to them, and again, we'll probably cover here as well. In April, a couple weeks later, we've got the International 3D Printing Industry Exhibition going on, and then we come back to the United States in the same week, Inside 3D Printing Conference, which I went to almost 2 years ago in San Jose, in New York, so maybe you may have an opportunity to go out there.
Hey, get me some press credentials, and I'll go out there for you.
Actually, that might not be. I should. Okay, we'll talk about it. Stay on, because I may have some sad news, or hopefully we can come up with some alternatives. And then obviously another show, 3D Print Design Show, going on as well in New York, and I don't know if that means clothing design or just 3D print design in general. And then obviously another, in the same time frame, we've got something going on in Kazakhstan, 3D printing. So, this is really a global thing that's going on, not only in the 3D fabrication, 3D scanning, VR. This is no longer isolated to one country, and I really like to discuss what's going on. So I'm going to use this as a segue to get into what hopefully won't be what I mentioned in my my intro, as well as you'll see on my YouTube channel, that this is our last episode. The problem with this, and Brian, you can attest to it takes money to do these kind of things, and even though sending these up to YouTube and using Google Hangouts is free, sort of, you still need the equipment behind the scene, and you still need to get out to things, and it still takes money. Sadly, a lot of these shows, I expect you to pay for everything. So getting out to them and providing information to your audience for free, somebody has to pay for it. And sadly, I paid with it for a lot of time and money, and really haven't seen any returns to kind of keep it self-sustaining. It has picked up a little bit. I hate to say that possibly this might be the last time I see Brian. I hope that's not the case.
Oh, no, not at all.
But I'm reaching out to you, my audience, to I don't know, throw a few dollars my way. I do have on my website a little donate thing. If you go out to my Square store, you can pick up some coasters from me, for a few bucks. And if I get a little bit here and there, then it will help continue to support this. I may have to dial back. I really hope I don't have to really shut it down. I was thinking earlier today before I started it, man, this is it. I'm going to be the only one here, and I'm going to turn to my camera and I'm going to say, okay, sayonara, and play this little video that I'll play just kind of out of humor. But once you get into it, you realize you got some great people out there. I had Brian on, and I don't know if you had a chance to watch Anderson from Rice University pop in to help me out in the beginning of the show. Sadly right now Chris is probably taking care of himself. I think he went off with some guys for, I don't know, a bachelor's weekend or something. I don't know. But out of 4 weekends, he's only been on the show Friday once. So I may have to look at finding other ways to continue making this work. Brian, I appreciate you coming on. It gives me great respect for you, and great respect that some people find this interesting. The fact that I had, oh gosh, sorry, Eric from Ultimaker on, who's the CEO of that company, when it didn't work out with the RepRap group in Midstate because of their internet issues. It was great for him to jump on from the Netherlands. It was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So obviously people care about this, and I need to figure a way to keep it moving, stop getting down, because it's costing me money, and I sometimes feel I'm not getting the people to watch it. But I do know that there are a few of you out there that watch this on a regular basis, so I thank you very much for doing so. So on that note, I'm going to give the last word to Brian, who's still hanging out with me. and then I'll end it with this thing I put together. Okay.
Okay, well, my last word on this is I don't think you should give up. I think you should, do the best you can, and I'm here to help you as much as possible. I know that through the years when I've done things that didn't make any money, it didn't stop me. You do it for the love of it, and it shows. And as you know, I am not a in front of the camera person. I do not. I have to be honest. I've never watched any of the stuff that was shot here because I just can't stand to see myself on camera. But because out of the respect for you and the stuff that you've done, I am on this. I'm on camera right now. So that being said, I think it would be a huge loss for the community, and I think that ultimately you're going to find that months and years from now, people are going to be looking back at some of these podcasts and for information. For just, I am a hungry person for information. I watch so much stuff about anything relevant to what I'm interested in, and I just think that it would be a shame to let that go away. So my hope is that it can continue, but if you can't continue, hopefully there's enough support down the line and things start picking up. And I have to be honest, I kind of am a little bit upset with Occipital because I wish they would release their iPhone 6 stuff. I think that everybody who's seen your cases and the stuff that you built in that community and that I've shown it to, they want it. There are people who don't even have a structure sensor who want it. On my video shoot, 3 people wanted to buy it because I was showing them you could just slap it against the wall and take selfies. So that being said, I think that sometimes people get in a little early on things, and it takes time to be recognized for the value and the hard work and the passion that you bring. And I just think that we can't give up and that we have to always strive forward. So.
Well, I knew there was a reason to have you on. Well, thank you for that, Brian. And,
you're welcome.
As I said, I know there are some regulars out there, and this is the reason I do it, and keep it going and try to get the interviews out there. There's some frustrating people out there that I have to badger sometime to get on, but I think in the long run it's ended. All right, well, on that, I'm going to fade to my ending here, and again, thank you, Brian, for coming on and joining us, and as well as Anderson, and here we go.